The bullet tore through Theresa Vaughn's laundry basket, scattering clean linens across the dusty street of Helena, Montana. And she knew without looking that Martha Henderson had thrown the rock from her second-story window again. It was 1878, and this mountain town nestled in the shadow of the Continental Divide had grown prosperous from gold strikes. But prosperity had not bred kindness, at least not toward Theresa. Her mother had come from Spain 15 years ago, a dark-eyed beauty who had married Theresa's father despite the whispers and the stares. And when fever took both parents 3 years back, those whispers had turned to outright hostility directed at their daughter. Theresa bent to gather the scattered clothes, her long black hair falling forward to hide the tears that threatened. She was 22 years old enough that most women in Helena were already married with children, but no decent man would court her. The mothers saw to that. They clutched their sons close when she walked by, as if her mixed heritage carried some contagion that might infect their pure American bloodlines. Her mother's Spanish accent had marked her as foreign, as other, and Theresa carried that mark like a brand even though she had been born right here in Montana territory. "Leave those," a deep voice said, and Theresa looked up to see a man crouching beside her, gathering the scattered linens with gentle hands. He was tall, with sun-weathered skin and dark blonde hair that fell past his collar. His eyes were the color of summer grass, bright and clear, and when he looked at her, there was no judgment in them, only concern. "I can manage," Theresa said, reaching for a petticoat that had landed near his boot. "I know you can," he replied, his voice carrying the lazy drawl of someone who had spent years under open skies. "But you should not have to. Did someone throw something at you?" "It does not matter," Theresa said, stuffing the clothes back into her basket with more force than necessary. "It happens." The man's jaw tightened and he stood, scanning the buildings around them. His hand rested on his hip near a well-worn Colt revolver, the holster tied down in the style of someone who knew how to use it. "It matters," he said quietly. "Who did it?" "Please," Theresa said, touching his arm without thinking. The contact sent an unexpected warmth through her and she pulled back quickly. "It will only make things worse if you cause trouble." He looked down at her and something in his expression softened. "I am Ethan Mallory," he said. "I have been working a ranch about 30 miles south, but I came to town for supplies, and to find a place that might need a ranch hand who is tired of sleeping in a bunkhouse with 15 other men who snore." Despite everything, Theresa felt a small smile tug at her lips. "That sounds unpleasant." "You have no idea," Ethan said, and his own smile transformed his face, making him look younger than the 30 years she guessed him to be. "What is your name?" "Theresa Vaughn," she said, and watched for the reaction she always saw. The slight withdrawal, the cooling of interest, the excuses that would follow, but Ethan's smile only widened. "Vaughn," he repeated. "Irish, my father was. My mother was from Barcelona." "Spain," Ethan said, and there was genuine interest in his voice. "I have never been, but I met a vaquero down in Texas who taught me everything I know about handling cattle. Best horseman I ever saw. He was from somewhere near Mexico City, but his father had come from Spain. The stories he told about the old country made me want to see it someday." Theresa stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. "You are not bothered by it?" "By what?" Ethan asked, and he seemed genuinely confused. "By my mother being foreign, by me being half Spanish." Ethan's expression shifted, understanding dawning in his eyes. "That is why someone threw something at you," he said, and it was not a question. "That is why you said it will only make things worse." Theresa looked away, unable to bear the pity she was sure she would see in his face. But Ethan stepped closer, close enough that she could smell sage and leather and honest sweat. "Where you are from makes you interesting," he said, his voice low and fierce. "Anyone who cannot see that is a fool." The words hit Theresa like a physical blow, so unexpected and so desperately needed that she felt her carefully constructed walls begin to crack. She had spent 3 years being invisible, being tolerated at best, and here was this stranger, this cowboy with kind eyes and a quick smile, saying words she had never thought to hear. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "No need for thanks," Ethan said. He picked up her basket, which was now full again, and offered his arm. "May I walk you home? I promise I will not throw anything at you along the way." That surprised a laugh out of her, genuine and bright, and she saw his eyes light up at the sound. "That is a low standard for companionship," she said. "I am just getting started," Ethan replied. "By the time we reach your door, I will have proven myself to be at least moderately entertaining and only slightly annoying." Theresa took his arm, feeling the solid strength beneath his worn shirt, and together they walked down Helena's main street. She felt eyes on them, felt the weight of judgment and speculation, but with Ethan beside her, it felt easier to bear. He talked as they walked, telling her about the ranch where he had been working, about the ornery bull that had chased him up a tree last week, about the view from the ridge line where he sometimes went to think. "It is beautiful country," he said. "Wild and hard, but beautiful. Like it is still deciding what it wants to be." "That is how I feel sometimes," Theresa admitted. "Like I am caught between two worlds, Spanish and American, and I do not quite fit in either one." "Maybe you are not meant to fit," Ethan said. "Maybe you are meant to be something new. Something that takes the best of both and makes it better." They had reached her small house at the edge of town, a modest structure that her father had built with his own hands. Theresa had kept it as neat as she could, but the paint was peeling and the garden was overgrown. There was only so much one person could do. "This is me," she said, reluctant to let go of his arm. Ethan set down her basket and looked at the house, then at the barn behind it that was missing several boards. "That roof looks like it could use some work before the next snow," he said. "And that fence is about to fall over." "I know," Theresa said, feeling defensive. "I do what I can, but there is only so much time and I have to take in washing to pay for food and supplies." "I was not criticizing," Ethan said quickly. "I was offering. I am good with my hands and I need a place to stay. I could fix up the barn, make it livable, and in exchange I could do repairs around here, help with the heavy work." Theresa's heart began to pound. "People would talk," she said. "They already think poorly of me. If they knew a man was living on my property, even in the barn, it would ruin what little reputation I have left." "Then we will make sure they know it is a business arrangement," Ethan said. "I will pay you rent for the barn space, and you can pay me in meals for the work I do. Everything above board and proper." "Why?" Theresa asked, searching his face. "Why would you do this? You do not know me." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his green eyes steady on hers. "When I was a boy, my family moved from place to place, following my father's work. We were always the outsiders, always the ones who did not quite belong. I know what it feels like to be judged for something you cannot control. And I know what it feels like to wish someone, anyone, would just give you a chance." The sincerity in his voice broke something open inside Theresa, some frozen place she had not realized existed. "All right," she heard herself say. "But only if you let me pay you properly. I will not be charity." "Deal," Ethan said, extending his hand. His grip was firm and warm, and he held on just a moment longer than necessary. "I will go get my things from the boarding house and be back before sunset. That will give me time to clear out the barn and make a space for my bedroll." He touched the brim of his hat and walked away, his long stride eating up the distance. Theresa watched him go, hardly believing what had just happened. For the first time in 3 years, she felt something like hope. By the time Ethan returned, leading a sturdy buckskin horse loaded with his possessions, Theresa had swept out the barn and found some old blankets to make the space more comfortable. It was not much, just a cleared corner with fresh straw and a makeshift shelf for his things, but Ethan looked at it like she had offered him a palace. "This is perfect," he said, dropping his saddle bags on the ground. "Better than perfect. I will have privacy and peace and your cooking if I am lucky." "I am a decent cook," Theresa admitted. "My mother taught me some Spanish dishes, though I rarely make them anymore. People in town do not like anything that reminds them she was different." "Well, I am not people in town," Ethan said. "And I would love to try whatever you want to make. I have been eating beans and hardtack for so long I have forgotten what real food tastes like." They fell into an easy routine over the next few days. Ethan was true to his word, rising early to fix the barn roof before the day grew too hot, then moving on to shore up the fence and repair the porch steps. Theresa cooked meals that reminded her of her mother, dishes with saffron and olive oil, with peppers and garlic, and Ethan ate with the enthusiasm of someone discovering treasure. "This is incredible," he said one evening, sopping up the last of his rice with a piece of bread. "What is this called again?" "Paella," Theresa said, pleasure warming her chest at his obvious enjoyment. "It is a dish from Valencia on the eastern coast. My mother learned it from her grandmother." "Tell me about her," Ethan said, leaning back in his chair. "Your mother, what was she like?" No one had asked her that in years. No one had wanted to know. Theresa felt tears prick her eyes as she began to speak, telling Ethan about her mother's laughter, about the songs she sang while she worked, about the way she had loved this wild country even though it had never truly loved her back. Ethan listened without interrupting, his attention complete and focused, and when Theresa finally fell silent, he reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "She sounds like she was an amazing woman," he said. "You must miss her terribly." "Every day," Theresa whispered. "And my father. He never cared what anyone thought. He loved her so much that nothing else mattered." "That is how it should be," Ethan said. "Love should not care about borders or bloodlines. It should just be." Their eyes met, and Theresa felt something shift between them, some subtle change in the air that made her skin tingle. Ethan's thumb brushed against her knuckles, a gentle touch that sent warmth racing up her arm, and for a moment she thought he might say something more. But then he pulled back, clearing his throat. "I should get back to the barn," he said, his voice rough. "Early start tomorrow. I want to get that front gate fixed before Sunday." Theresa nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She watched him walk out into the gathering dusk, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the purple sky, and wondered if he felt it too, this growing thing between them that was more than friendship but not yet something she could name. Sunday came, and with it, the weekly trip to town for church. Theresa had stopped attending months ago, tired of the cold stares and the way people shifted away from her in the pews, but Ethan convinced her to try again. "I will be with you," he said simply. "And if anyone gives you trouble, they will have to answer to me." The church was packed when they arrived, families filling the wooden benches in their Sunday best. Theresa felt every eye turn toward them as they entered, felt the weight of speculation and disapproval. But Ethan kept his hand on the small of her back, steady and sure, and guided her to a seat near the middle. Martha Henderson, the woman who had thrown the rock, sat 2 rows ahead with her 3 daughters. She turned to stare, her face pinched with displeasure, and Theresa braced herself for whatever was coming. After the service, as people milled about outside exchanging pleasantries and gossip, Martha approached with her oldest daughter in tow. "Mr. Mallory," she said, ignoring Theresa completely. "I wonder if you are aware of the company you are keeping." "I am keeping company with Miss Vaughn," Ethan said, his voice pleasant but with an edge of steel. "A hard-working, respectable woman who has been kind enough to rent me barn space while I look for steady work." "She is not like us," Martha said, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "Her mother was a foreigner, Spanish. You cannot trust that kind." Ethan's expression did not change, but Theresa felt him go very still beside her. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, and now the steel was unmistakable. "I have found that a person's character has nothing to do with where they were born and everything to do with how they treat others. Miss Vaughn has shown me nothing but kindness and hospitality. You, on the other hand, threw a rock at her last week and scattered her laundry in the street. So if we are discussing who can be trusted, I know where I stand." Martha's face turned an ugly shade of red. "How dare you?" "I dare because I have eyes to see and a brain to think," Ethan interrupted. "And what I see is a woman who has done nothing wrong being treated like a criminal by people who should know better. Now, if you will excuse us, Miss Vaughn and I have things to discuss." He offered Theresa his arm and led her away, leaving Martha sputtering behind them. Theresa waited until they were out of earshot before she spoke. "You should not have done that," she said, but there was no real heat in her words. "She will make your life difficult now." "Let her try," Ethan said. "I have dealt with worse than Martha Henderson. Besides, someone needed to say something. I cannot believe people have been treating you this way for years." "It is how things are," Theresa said. "I learned to accept it." "Well, I have not accepted it and I am not going to," Ethan said firmly. He stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "You deserve better, Theresa. You deserve people who see how strong you are, how kind, how beautiful." The word hung between them, beautiful, and Theresa felt her breath catch. "Ethan," she whispered, but she did not know what to say next. "I know this is fast," Ethan said, his green eyes searching hers. "I know I have only been here a week. But I have to tell you, Theresa, because if I do not, I think I will burst. I am falling for you. Maybe I have been falling since the moment I saw you gathering your laundry in the street, refusing to let them break you. You are the strongest person I have ever met, and where you come from, who your mother was, it does not make you less. It makes you more." Theresa felt tears spill down her cheeks, but for once, they were not tears of loneliness or pain. "I am falling for you too," she admitted. "I have been so afraid to hope, so afraid that you would realize what everyone else thinks and leave. But you stayed. You defended me. You see me, Ethan, really see me, and I do not know what I did to deserve that, but I am grateful." Ethan pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and Theresa let herself lean into his strength. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the middle of the dusty street, and Theresa did not care who saw or what they thought. For the first time in 3 years, she felt like she belonged somewhere, and that somewhere was in Ethan's arms. The weeks that followed were the happiest Theresa could remember since her parents died. Ethan found work with a freight company, hauling goods between Helena and the surrounding mining camps, but he always came home to her. Home. That was what her little house had become, a place where both of them belonged. They courted properly, or as properly as they could manage. Ethan took her to town dances, ignoring the stares and whispers, and they picnicked by the creek that ran behind her property, talking for hours about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood in Missouri, about the restlessness that had driven him west, about the dreams he had of owning his own ranch someday. She told him about her mother's stories of Spain, about the grief of losing both parents within months of each other, about the loneliness that had been her constant companion until he arrived. "I am not lonely anymore," she said one evening as they sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. "I did not realize how much I had closed myself off until you opened me up again." "I am not lonely anymore either," Ethan said, taking her hand. "I have been drifting for years, never quite finding a place that felt right. But this here with you, this feels like home." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and Theresa felt her whole world narrow to the point where their lips met. It was not her first kiss, but it was the first that mattered, the first that promised something lasting and true. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know we have not been courting long and I do not have much to offer you, but I swear I will spend every day trying to make you happy. Marry me, Theresa. Let me be your family." "Yes," Theresa said, and the word came out on a sob of joy. "Yes, Ethan, yes." They were married a month later by the justice of the peace, with only a few of Ethan's friends from the freight company in attendance. Theresa wore a simple white dress that had belonged to her mother, altered to fit her smaller frame, and Ethan wore his best shirt and a new vest he had purchased specially for the occasion. It was not the grand wedding she had imagined as a girl, but it was perfect because it was theirs. The reception was held at Theresa's house, now their house, and Ethan's friends proved to be kind men who treated Theresa with respect and genuine warmth. One of them, a grizzled freighter named Jack, pulled Ethan aside at one point. "You got yourself a good woman there," Jack said, loud enough that Theresa could hear from where she stood by the food table. "Do not let the small-minded folks in this town make you doubt it." "I will not," Ethan promised, and his eyes found Theresa's across the room. The love in his gaze made her feel like she could do anything, be anything. That night, after the guests had left and they were finally alone, Ethan carried Theresa over the threshold of her bedroom, now their bedroom. He set her down gently, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the buttons on the back of her dress. "I want to make this good for you," he whispered against her neck. "Tell me if I do anything you do not like," but there was nothing Theresa did not like. Ethan was tender and patient, taking his time to learn what made her gasp, what made her sigh. When he finally made her his wife in truth, Theresa felt like she was shattering and being remade all at once, becoming something new and better than she had been before. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the sheets, and Ethan traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I love you," he said. "I do not say it enough, but I do. I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "I love you too," Theresa replied, pressing a kiss to his chest. "And you do not need to be scared. I am not going anywhere." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Ethan continued working for the freight company while saving every penny he could toward his dream of a ranch. Theresa took in sewing now instead of laundry, finding that her skill with a needle was in demand among the wealthier families in Helena. They still faced prejudice, still heard the whispers, but together they could weather it. 6 months into their marriage, Theresa began to feel unwell in the mornings, a persistent nausea that made it hard to face breakfast. At first, she thought it was something she had eaten, but when she missed her monthly courses, she realized the truth. She was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She wanted children, had always wanted them, but the thought of bringing a child into a world that might reject them the way it had rejected her was frightening. When she told Ethan, sitting him down at the kitchen table after supper, she watched his face carefully for any sign of doubt or fear. Instead, his face split into the widest grin she had ever seen. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. He dropped to his knees beside her chair and pressed his ear to her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Theresa, this is the best news you could have given me." "You are not worried," she asked, running her fingers through his hair. "About what people will say, about how they will treat our child." "People will say what they always say," Ethan replied, looking up at her. "But our child will know they are loved. They will know that their heritage is something to be proud of, not ashamed of. And they will know that their parents will fight for them always." Theresa's pregnancy progressed smoothly, though the morning sickness lingered longer than she would have liked. Ethan was attentive to the point of being overwhelming, constantly asking if she needed anything, if she was comfortable, if she should be resting more. It was sweet, if occasionally annoying. "I am pregnant, not fragile," she told him one day when he tried to stop her from lifting a basket of mending. "Women have been doing this for thousands of years. I can carry a basket." "I know," Ethan said, looking sheepish. "I just worry. You and this baby are the most important things in my life. I cannot help wanting to protect you." "Then protect me by treating me like I am capable," Theresa said gently. "I will tell you if I need help. I promise." As her belly swelled, Theresa noticed a subtle shift in how some of the women in town treated her. A few of the younger ones, women who had married recently themselves, began to nod to her in the street. One, a blonde woman named Sarah who had moved to Helena from Denver, even stopped to ask how she was feeling. "I remember being that pregnant in the summer," Sarah said with a sympathetic smile. "I thought I would melt. If you need anything, anything at all, my house is the blue one on 3rd Street." It was a small kindness, but it meant the world to Theresa. Maybe not everyone in Helena was determined to hate her. Maybe there was hope for change. Ethan's savings had grown enough that he began seriously looking for land. He wanted to find a place before the baby came, somewhere they could build a future. Every Sunday, he rode out to look at different parcels, returning with descriptions of rolling grassland, timber stands, and water access. "I found it," he said one evening in late October, his eyes bright with excitement. "Perfect land about 10 miles north of here. 160 acres with a creek running through it and enough timber to build a house and barn. The man who owns it is moving back east and willing to sell for a fair price." "Can we afford it?" Theresa asked, her hand resting on her swollen belly where the baby was performing acrobatics. "With what I have saved and what we can get for this house, yes," Ethan said. He knelt beside her chair, taking her free hand. "I know it means leaving the home your father built, and I will not do it if you do not want to. But Theresa, this could be our chance. Our own land, our own ranch, a place where we make the rules and no one can tell us we do not belong." Theresa thought about it, about the little house that held so many memories, both painful and precious. But Ethan was right. This was a chance to start fresh, to build something that was entirely theirs. "Let us do it," she said. "Let us buy the land and build our future there." The process took weeks, but by early December, the land was theirs. Ethan hired a crew to help him build a cabin, working from dawn to dusk to get walls and a roof up before the worst of winter set in. Theresa packed their belongings, saying goodbye to the house where she had been born, where her parents had loved and laughed and built a life. On moving day, as they loaded the last of their possessions onto a borrowed wagon, Martha Henderson appeared in the street. Theresa braced herself for one final insult, one last attempt to wound. But Martha just stood there watching, and when their eyes met, something like regret flickered across the older woman's face. "Good luck," Martha said quietly, and then she turned and walked away. It was not an apology, but it was something. Theresa chose to take it as a small victory. The cabin was rough but sturdy, one large room with a sleeping loft that Ethan promised to partition once the baby came. They moved in just before the first big snow. And Theresa spent her days making curtains and arranging their few pieces of furniture while Ethan worked on building a proper barn for his horse and the milk cow he had traded for. Christmas came quietly, just the two of them in their new home. Ethan cut a small pine tree and Theresa decorated it with paper stars she had folded, and they exchanged simple gifts. He gave her a wooden rocking chair he had made himself, the joints perfectly fitted and the wood sanded smooth. She gave him a shirt she had sewn, embroidered at the collar with a pattern her mother had taught her. "It is perfect," Ethan said, running his fingers over the intricate stitching. "You are perfect." They made love that night in front of the fireplace, gentle and slow because of her advanced pregnancy, and Theresa felt so full of love she thought she might burst with it. Their son was born on a frigid January morning in 1879, howling his arrival into the world with impressive volume. The midwife, an older woman named Grace who lived on a neighboring ranch, cleaned him up and placed him in Theresa's arms. "He is healthy and strong," Grace said with approval. "What will you call him?" Theresa looked at Ethan, who had tears streaming down his face as he stared at his son. They had discussed names but had not decided on anything definite. "Miguel," Theresa said, choosing her father's middle name. "Miguel James Mallory." "It is perfect," Ethan said, leaning down to kiss her forehead and then his son's. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I am the luckiest man alive." The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Miguel was a good baby, healthy and happy, and watching Ethan with him made Theresa fall in love with her husband all over again. He was a natural father, patient and gentle, singing off-key lullabies and walking the floor when Miguel was fussy. As winter gave way to spring, Ethan began the real work of building their ranch. He purchased a small herd of cattle, just 20 head to start, and spent his days mending fences and clearing land for pasture. Theresa helped when she could. Miguel strapped to her back in a sling her mother had taught her to make, and slowly, their dream began to take shape. Neighbors began to stop by, curious about the new family on the land. Most were kind, accepting Ethan's offered coffee and Theresa's cooking without comment. A few were cold, their eyes lingering on Theresa's dark hair and Miguel's olive-toned skin with disapproval, but they were the minority. Out here, away from town, people seemed more concerned with survival than with bloodlines. One neighbor in particular, a rancher named Tom Wright who owned the land to the west, became a good friend. He was older, in his 50s, with grown children scattered across the territory. He taught Ethan the finer points of ranching and often stopped by with advice or an extra pair of hands when they were needed. "You have a good thing here," Tom said one day as they repaired a fence line together. "Good land, good woman, healthy boy. Do not let anyone tell you different." "I will not," Ethan promised. "We have worked too hard to build this to let anyone tear it down." Miguel grew from a baby into a toddler, sturdy and fearless, with his mother's dark eyes and his father's easy smile. He learned to walk holding onto the fence rails and said his first word, "Papa," on Ethan's 23rd birthday. Theresa, watching her husband sweep their son into his arms and spin him around, felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. When Miguel was 2, Theresa discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news came with less fear and more excitement. They knew what to expect, knew they could handle it, and Miguel was old enough that he would not require as much constant attention. Their daughter arrived in the spring of 1882, small and dainty where her brother had been solid and robust. She had Ethan's green eyes and Theresa's black hair, and when she wrapped her tiny hand around her father's finger, Ethan was lost. "Sophia," Theresa said, choosing another name from her Spanish heritage. "Sophia Rose Mallory." "It is beautiful," Ethan said, unable to tear his eyes away from his daughter. She is beautiful, just like her mother. The ranch continued to prosper. Ethan's herd grew to 50 head, then 75, then 100. He hired occasional help during branding and roundup, paying fair wages that earned him a reputation as a good man to work for. Theresa expanded her garden and learned to preserve food for the winter, proud of the jars of vegetables and fruit that lined their shelves. Money was not plentiful, but it was steady, and they were able to add on to the cabin, creating separate bedrooms for the children and a real kitchen for Theresa. Ethan built her a proper table, large enough for their growing family, and Theresa sewed curtains and quilts that made the house feel like a home. Miguel and Sofia grew up wild and free, running through the pastures and playing in the creek. Ethan taught Miguel to ride almost as soon as the boy could walk, and by the time he was 5, Miguel could sit a horse as well as any adult. Sofia was more cautious, preferring to help her mother in the garden or with the cooking, but she had a stubborn streak that promised she would be a force to be reckoned with when she was older. "She is like you," Ethan told Theresa one evening, watching Sofia refuse to give up on braiding a rope that kept unraveling. "Determined and strong. She is like both of us," Theresa corrected. "She has your stubbornness too." Life was not without challenges. There were hard winters when they worried about the cattle, dry summers when the creek ran low, and always the background hum of prejudice from those who could not see past Theresa's heritage. But they faced it together, and that made all the difference. When Miguel was 6 and Sofia 4, they made the trip to Helena for supplies. It had been years since Theresa had been back to town, and she was nervous about how they would be received. But Ethan held her hand as they walked down the main street, Miguel and Sofia between them, and Theresa held her head high. They ran into Martha Henderson outside the general store. The older woman had aged, her hair now more gray than brown, and when she saw them, she stopped. "Theresa Mallory," Martha said, and there was something different in her voice. "I heard you all were doing well out at your ranch." "We are," Theresa said cautiously. "These are our children, Miguel and Sofia." Martha looked at the children, and to Theresa's surprise, she smiled. "They are beautiful," she said. "You must be very proud." "We are," Ethan said, his arm around Theresa's waist. "They are the best thing that ever happened to us." Martha nodded, and when she looked at Theresa again, there were tears in her eyes. "I owe you an apology," she said, "for the way I treated you all those years ago. It was wrong, and I knew it was wrong even then, but I was too stubborn and too set in my ways to admit it. You did not deserve that. No one does." Theresa felt her throat tighten with emotion. She had imagined this moment countless times, the vindication and the triumph, but now that it was here, all she felt was sadness for the wasted years. "Thank you," she said quietly. "It means something to hear you say that." "I hope you can forgive me," Martha said. "I understand if you cannot, but I wanted you to know that I am sorry." "I forgive you," Theresa said, and realized as she spoke that it was true. She had let go of the bitterness long ago, too busy building a life to hold onto old hurts. Water under the bridge. They parted ways amicably, and as Theresa and her family continued their shopping, she noticed that people were friendlier than she remembered. Some of it was surely Ethan's influence, his reputation in the community smoothing the way, but some of it felt like genuine change. The town was growing, bringing in new people with new ideas, and perhaps that was making the old prejudices seem as outdated as they truly were. That evening, as they made camp on the way home, Ethan pulled Theresa close. "I am proud of you," he said, "for forgiving Martha. That could not have been easy." "It was easier than I thought," Theresa admitted. "I have so much now, so much happiness that the old pain feels distant, like it happened to someone else. You deserve every bit of happiness you have, Ethan said fiercely. And more. I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know that. You already do, Theresa said, kissing him softly. Every single day. The years continued to pass in a blur of hard work and simple joys. Miguel grew into a capable young man, taking on more responsibility around the ranch and showing a natural talent for working with cattle. Sophia remained more interested in the domestic side of things, but she had a head for numbers that Ethan put to good use managing the ranch accounts. When Miguel was 12 and Sophia 10, Theresa discovered she was pregnant again. It was unexpected, as she had thought her childbearing years were behind her, but the pregnancy progressed smoothly. Their third child, another son they named David, was born in the summer of 1888, a surprise blessing that completed their family. Ethan, now in his early 40s, had threads of silver in his hair, but he was still strong and vital, still the man who had defended Theresa in the street all those years ago. He took to fatherhood again with the same enthusiasm he had shown with their first two children, staying up late with David when he was fussy and teaching him to ride as soon as he was old enough. The ranch had become one of the most successful in the region, with several hundred head of cattle and a reputation for quality stock. Ethan had hired permanent hands to help with the work, good men who treated Theresa and the children with respect. They built a proper bunkhouse for the hands and expanded the main house again, adding a parlor and a second floor. Theresa's garden had become legendary among their neighbors, producing vegetables and herbs that she used in cooking and in remedies for common ailments. Women from surrounding ranches often stopped by for advice or cuttings from her plants, and Theresa found a community she had never expected. These ranch women did not care about her heritage. They cared about her knowledge, her kindness, and her willingness to help. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Theresa with a trip. He arranged for Tom Wright's wife to watch the children, though Miguel at 18 hardly needed watching, and he took Theresa to the hotel in Helena, the same town where they had met all those years ago. I wanted to bring you back here, Ethan said as they stood on the street where they had first spoken. To the place where it all started. I want you to see how much has changed. And it had changed. The town had grown significantly with new buildings and new families. More importantly, when they walked into the church on Sunday, Theresa in her best dress and Ethan proud beside her, people smiled. Some came up to shake their hands, to ask about the ranch and the children. It was not universal acceptance, but it was acceptance nonetheless, and it felt like a victory. That night in their hotel room, Ethan made love to her with the passion of a new husband and the skill of a man who had spent 20 years learning exactly what his wife needed. Afterwards, as they lay tangled in the sheets, Theresa traced the lines on his face, each one marking a year they had spent together. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Choosing me? I know your life would have been easier if you had married someone else, someone acceptable." Ethan caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Not for a single second," he said. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Theresa. You and our children. I would choose you again every single day for the rest of my life." "I love you," Theresa whispered. "I will always love you." "And I will always love you," Ethan replied, "until my last breath and beyond." They returned home to find everything running smoothly. Miguel had handled the ranch operations with competence, and Sophia had kept David entertained and out of trouble. It was clear that their children were growing up capable and confident, ready to face whatever the future held. Miguel married at 21, choosing a sweet-natured girl named Emma from a nearby ranch. The wedding was a joyous affair, with neighbors coming from miles around to celebrate. Watching her son pledge his life to his bride, Theresa felt tears of happiness stream down her face. Ethan squeezed her hand, understanding without words. Sophia proved more difficult to match. She had high standards and a sharp tongue that intimidated most of the young men in the area. But when she was 19, she met a schoolteacher from Helena named William, a quiet man with a love of books that matched her own. They courted for a year before marrying, and Sophia moved to town to be near William's school. David, still young, showed signs of taking after his father, with a love of the land and a natural way with animals. Ethan spent hours teaching him everything he knew, passing on not just skills but values, the importance of hard work and treating people fairly. "He is going to be something special," Ethan told Theresa one evening as they watched David work with a young colt. "They all are. We did good, Theresa." "We did," Theresa agreed. "We built something worth having, not just the ranch but the family, the life." As they entered their late 40s, both Ethan and Theresa began to slow down, letting the younger generation take on more of the physical labor. They still worked, still contributed, but they also allowed themselves time to simply enjoy what they had built. They took walks in the evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. They sat on their porch in rocking chairs, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing. On Theresa's 50th birthday, Ethan gathered the whole family for a celebration. Miguel and Emma brought their 3 children, rowdy boys who tore around the ranch like wild colts. Sophia and William came from Helena with their daughter, a serious little girl who loved to read. David, now 20, had invited a girl he had been courting, a rancher's daughter with a ready laugh. As Theresa looked around at the table filled with family, at the children and grandchildren who carried both her blood and Ethan's, she felt overwhelming gratitude. This life, this beautiful, messy, wonderful life, had seemed impossible that day in Helena when she was gathering scattered laundry from the street. But one man's kindness, one cowboy's belief that where she came from made her interesting rather than less, had changed everything. "Thank you," she said to Ethan that night after everyone had gone home or to bed. They stood on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "For seeing me when no one else would, for loving me when it was not easy, for building this life with me." "I should be thanking you," Ethan replied, pulling her close. "You took a chance on a drifter with nothing but a bedroll and a horse. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Theresa said. "That is how it works when 2 people truly love each other. They do not keep score. They just build together." The years continued their steady march. Miguel took over more and more of the ranch operations as Ethan's knees began to protest long days in the saddle. Sophia had another child, a son this time, and divided her time between Helena and the ranch. David married his sweetheart, and they built a house on the eastern portion of the property, planning to start their own small herd. Ethan and Theresa became the patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling family, their home always full of visiting children and grandchildren. They passed on stories of the old days, teaching the younger generation about where they came from and the struggles that had shaped them. Theresa made sure her grandchildren knew about their Spanish heritage, teaching them words in her mother's language and cooking the dishes that had been passed down through generations. "You come from strong people," she told them. "From people who crossed oceans and mountains to build something better. Never forget that. Never let anyone make you feel less because of where you came from." When Ethan turned 60, the family threw a massive celebration. Friends and neighbors from across the territory came to honor the man who had built one of the most successful ranches in Montana, and who had always dealt fairly with everyone he met. There were speeches and toasts, and through it all, Ethan kept his eyes on Theresa, the woman who had made it all possible. That night, exhausted but happy, they lay in bed together. Ethan's hair was white now, his face weathered by decades of sun and wind, but to Theresa, he was still the handsome cowboy who had stopped to help her in the street. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" she asked. "About where I am from making me interesting." "I remember every word of that day," Ethan replied. "I remember thinking that I had never seen anyone so beautiful or so brave." "I was not brave," Theresa protested. "I was just surviving." "Sometimes survival is the bravest thing of all," Ethan said. "You could have let them break you, but you did not. You kept going, kept your dignity, kept your strength. That is what made me fall in love with you." "I fell in love with you because you saw me," Theresa said. "Really saw me, not what people said I was, but who I actually was. You gave me back myself, Ethan. You gave me the courage to be proud of my heritage instead of ashamed of it." They drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, as they had done for nearly 40 years, and Theresa dreamed of her mother. In the dream, her mother was young and beautiful, standing in the doorway of the old house in Helena, and she was smiling. "You did well, my daughter," her mother said. "You built a good life. I am proud of you." Theresa woke with tears on her cheeks but peace in her heart. She had honored her mother's memory by refusing to hide who she was, by passing on their heritage to the next generation, by building a family that celebrated all the different threads that made up their tapestry. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and Ethan and Theresa grew older but no less devoted to each other. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch had expanded over the years, now encompassing nearly 1,000 acres and employing a dozen hands year-round. Ethan's health began to decline in his 70s. His knees finally gave out completely, leaving him dependent on a cane, and his heart started to cause problems. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Theresa never wavered. On good days, they still sat on the porch together, watching the ranch they had built continue to thrive under Miguel's management. "I have had a good life," Ethan said one evening as the sun set behind the mountains. "Better than I ever dreamed possible, and it is all because of you." "We built it together," Theresa reminded him, her own hair now white, her face lined with the years. "Everything we have we made as a team, partners," Ethan agreed. "From that first day to this one, I love you, Theresa Mallory. I have loved you for over 50 years, and I will love you forever." "And I love you," Theresa replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "My cowboy, my hero, my heart." They sat like that as darkness fell, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. Around them, the ranch buzzed with life, with family, with the legacy they had created. The prejudice that had once seemed insurmountable was now a distant memory, replaced by acceptance and respect. Theresa thought about that day in Helena, about the woman she had been, alone and shunned, gathering her scattered laundry from the street. She thought about the cowboy who had stopped to help, who had said those magic words that changed everything. "Where you are from makes you interesting." Such simple words, but they had opened a door she thought was forever closed. Through that door had come love and family, struggle and triumph, heartbreak and joy. Through that door had come a life worth living, a legacy worth leaving. And as Theresa sat beside her husband in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the evidence of all they had built together, she knew with absolute certainty that she would not change a single thing. Their story was not perfect. It had been hard and painful and full of challenges. But it was theirs, and it was beautiful, and it had all started with one cowboy's kindness and one woman's courage to hope again. That was enough. That was everything. Years later, when both Ethan and Theresa had passed peacefully in their sleep within days of each other, their children gathered to lay them to rest on a hill overlooking the ranch. Miguel, now an old man himself, spoke at the service about his parents' love and courage. "They taught us that family is not just about blood," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "It is about choosing to love even when the world tells you not to. It is about building something together that will outlast you. They showed us how to be strong and how to be kind, and everything good in my life I owe to them." The ranch continued for generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story. But they never forgot the couple who started it all. The Spanish-Irish woman who refused to be broken, and the cowboy who loved her for exactly who she was. Their story became family legend, passed down to children and grandchildren, a reminder that love can triumph over prejudice, and that one person's kindness can change everything. In the town of Helena, where it all began, a historical marker was eventually placed near where Theresa had once gathered scattered laundry from the street. It told the story of Ethan and Theresa Mallory, pioneers who helped settle Montana territory and built one of the region's most successful ranches. But it also told a more important story, about acceptance and love, about seeing past differences to the person underneath. Tourists would stop to read the marker, and some would make the drive out to the ranch, now a historical site managed by Theresa and Ethan's descendants. They would walk through the original cabin, preserved and maintained, and see the life this couple had built from nothing. They would hear the stories about prejudice overcome and barriers broken. And some, standing in that place where so much love had flourished, would feel inspired to be more accepting, more open, more willing to see the beauty in differences. That was the true legacy of Ethan and Theresa Mallory. Not just the land or the cattle or the successful business, but the lesson they taught about the transformative power of love and acceptance. They proved that where you come from does not define you, that heritage is something to celebrate rather than hide, and that one person's belief in you can give you the strength to believe in yourself. Their love story, which began in the dusty streets of a frontier town in 1878, became a beacon for future generations. A reminder that the best of the American West was not found in gold or land or conquest, but in the courage to love across boundaries and the determination to build a life based on respect and partnership. Ethan and Theresa had lived that truth every day of their lives together, and in doing so, they created something that would last forever, not just in their descendants, but in every person who heard their story and chose to be a little braver, a little kinder, a little more open to the beautiful possibilities that come from embracing our differences rather than fearing them.